And good evening. It's April 18th, 2024, and welcome to one of our branches on the vine with another episode from the folks at Aleph Beta. You know me, I'm always interested in patterns, context, and connections. Go figure. And we're in this time of year again, the feast of Passover, right? Pesach, one of the Moedim, this appointed time that God wants us to remember. And Rabbi David Fohrman, along with Aleph Beta, has a very interesting and compelling presentation as he talks about this God of empathy and action with Pesach, his name, what brought us here, and the connections to be seen. So, welcome this evening to the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you do find these kinds of podcasts useful, it's when you click the subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that's when you click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people, if they wish. So, in this video, we have patterns, context, connections, and, as I occasionally do here on the Dusty Feet, I choose to defer my time to a compelling teacher. So tonight, I'm going to defer my time to Rabbi David Fohrman. I'm going to let him draw you in to show you this God of empathy and action. So let's listen.
Hi folks, I'm Rabbi David Fohrman, and Pesach is just around the corner, so let me just ask you this very fundamental question. What is the Exodus from Egypt supposed to actually mean to me? God redeemed us from slavery all those years ago, but how should that actually change my life today?
God himself seems to give us a very clear answer to that question. Right at Mount Sinai, just weeks after the Exodus, he talks about the Exodus and seems to very clearly imply its meaning. He says to us, right in the very beginning of the Ten Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim m'beit avadim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And then what's the next thing he says? 600 and so odd commands. It's quite a laundry list. God's logic here seems pretty clear. I took you out of the land of Egypt, so you should keep my commandments.
So that seems to be our answer, right? I mean, at least how God sees it. How should the Exodus change my life? God redeemed my nation, and I should therefore follow his mitzvot. Which seems kind of reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, God dramatically transformed our lives for the better. He took us out of Egypt, out of slavery with signs and wonders. It seems like the least I can do to follow his 613 laws, right? Except that, at least for me, when you kind of stop to think about that idea, something about it seems to sort of gnaw at you. Let me try to explain the difficulty I see here with maybe a bit of an analogy.
Imagine you're traveling through Europe and your car breaks down on some back road. Fortunately, some guy by the name of Igor from Uzbekistan or something, he stops and helps you put on that spare tire. So you're thankful to Igor. You exchange numbers and go on your merry way. A few weeks later, you get a call from Igor. Hey, Rabbi Fohrman, it's Igor, remember? The Uzbeki guy who gave you a hand when your car broke down? Listen, I'm in a bit of a fix myself. Don't ask. Lost my passport. Stuck in an airport. I was wondering, can you wire me some money? And you do. And then Igor calls back with some more requests. Hundreds of them, as a matter of fact. 613 to be exact. What would be your reaction? I might excuse myself for thinking, Igor, it's great to hear from you and everything, but I don't know, the whole thing kind of feels a little transactional, a little coercive even. I might wire him the money, after all he did help me, but I wouldn't feel great about it. And I wouldn't even feel great about Igor. So, how is that not what God did? Listen again to the beginning of the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Is God talking like Igor here? Is keeping the mitzvot some kind of elaborate tit for tat? Is that what God was trying to imply with that first of the Ten Commandments? And if that wasn't what he meant, what did he mean?
So I want to argue to you that there's actually another way to read this first of the Ten Commandments, a decidedly un-Igor way. And it's got stunning ramifications, really, for the way that we experience our relationship with God and the way that we understand Pesach. Come with me and let's try to explore this. We may never look at the Ten Commandments, or the Exodus for that matter, in quite the same way ever again.
So I want to suggest to you that the key here is seeing the Ten Commandments through a certain lens, the lens of another story that seems to overlay upon it. That other story appears earlier in the Torah, before the Ten Commandments. It's a story involving the same mountain. Listen to how the story of the burning bush begins. Moshe hayaroa et son Yitro, Chotzno Kohen Midian. And Moses, he was shepherding the sheep of his father-in-law Yitro, Vayinag et atzon achara midbar, and he led those sheep through the desert, Vayavo el har Elokim Choreva, and he came to the mountain of God at Chorev. And now ask yourself, when else did you hear something like that? When else does Moses lead sheep through a desert, the sheep of Father, until he gets to the mountain of God at Chorev? That happens at Sinai. Moses leads sheep, but the sheep aren't people. He leads the sheep of father-in-law, except this time it's Father in heaven, and he leads them through the desert, and once again he arrives at the mountain of God at Chorev. It seems like the beginning of the burning bush story is an eerie kind of predecessor to the beginning of the Sinai story. So the interesting thing is that the parallels between these episodes don't stop here, because if you look at the next thing that happens in the burning bush episode, we hear about this burning bush that's not consumed. Hasne bo'er ba'esh vasne einenu ukal. And if you think about that notion about fire descending upon something and the thing not burning, we have the same imagery happen at the mountain. Var Sinai Ashan Kulo, when the mountain was full of smoke, Mipnei Asher Yarad Alav Hashem Be'esh, because God had descended upon it in fire, except the mountain wasn't burning. It was still there, just like the bush was burning, but still there. So the parallels between these stories actually continue further. Next thing that happens in the burning bush, God calls to Moses, Vayikra elav Elokim. And as it happens, same thing happens in the Sinai narrative. Vayikra Hashem LaMoshe. God calls to Moses. And what does God say at the burning bush? Al tikrav halam, don't get too close. At Sinai, don't get too close. There's this perimeter around the mountain. If the people invade the perimeter, they might die. It's too dangerous. So if you add it all up, we've got 4 parallels in order in both of these prologues, right? First verse of the burning bush narrative. You got Moses leading those sheep through the desert. You've got this burning bush that's not consumed. You've got God calling to Moses. You've got this command, don't touch. That's the way it is at the burning bush, and that's the way at Sinai. So if the prologue to these stories is the same, what about the stories themselves? What about what God says at the burning bush? What about what God says at Sinai? Could they somehow be related too? Well, the next thing that happens at the burning bush is that God speaks to Moses and tells him that he wants him to lead the people out of Egypt. Moses tries to avoid taking the job, and God and Moses have this back and forth with one another. Moses gives 5 reasons, one after another, why he can't go, and God parries each of those 5 excuses. And at Sinai, the next narrative is the 10 Commandments, with 5 commands on each of the tablets. So, if these parallels between the stories continue, it might be the case that the private conversation between God and Moses at the burning bush somehow becomes the basis for the public conversation between God and the people, in at least the first 5 of these 10 Commandments. To see if that's true, what we're going to do is to continue going through each of these stories, the burning bush and the first tablet of the 10 Commandments. As we do, we're going to pay attention to how these play off of each other. And we'll also pay attention to the common thread that seems to be developing in each narrative. In other words, what theme binds together the various different parts of God's conversation with Moses, and what theme binds together the various different commands on the first tablet. Let's begin with the burning bush. Vayomer, and God said, Anochi Elokei Avicha, I am the God of your fathers. Those are the first words of the Ten Commandments. The same Anochi, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. But there is a difference, isn't there? Because the first time around at the burning bush, who was God? The God of your fathers. The second time around, who is God? I'm your God. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Why? What's the difference? Why the second time around at Sinai, all of a sudden does God become your God? The answer is, look what he says. Why am I your God? Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, because I did something. I just took you out of Egypt, the house of bondage. That makes me your God. See, the first time around, I hadn't done that yet. Now, though, I'm no longer just their God. I'm your God. I just took you out of Egypt. As it turns out, those words, too, are borrowed from something God said to Moses at the burning bush, because the exchange opened with, I am the Lord, God of your fathers, and it ended with, and Moses, you're supposed to take my people out of Egypt. So if you kind of put those two things together, Anochi Elokei Avicha v'hotzeat ami b'nei Yisrael miMitzrayim, that sort of becomes, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. It's right there. The discrepancy, though, is that there's a whole middle that's missing, right? The whole middle doesn't appear to be there in the Ten Commandments. What is in that middle, and why doesn't it appear to be there? Vayomer Hashem, and God says, Ra'o ra'iti et ani ami asher b'Mitzrayim. I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. Et tzakatam shamati mibnei nogzav. I've heard their cries. Yadati et machovav. I feel, I understand, I know their pain.
We have a word for all that in English. It's empathy. To experience what someone else is experiencing as deeply as possible, even if that experience is uncomfortable or painful. And empathy leads to something. It spurs you to action, which is actually what you see in the very next words here.
Va'ered latzilo mi'ad Mitzrayim, and I will go down to save them from the hand of Egypt and to bring them to a land, a good land, a land that flows with milk and honey. God feels what the people feel and acts to save them because he feels their pain so deeply. Why doesn't that get reflected in the Ten Commandments, in that first command? Why does the middle of that statement of God go missing? Unless it doesn't go missing. Because there's one more word in the Ten Commandments that got sort of surreptitiously added. It's God's name. You see, back at the burning bush, Anochi Elokei Avicha, I am the God of your fathers. But at the Ten Commandments, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Yud Hey and Vav and Hey.
That special, mysterious name of God, what does it mean? I want to suggest a radical theory to you. That word, that one word, that name of God, it's actually shorthand for everything that was in the middle of that sandwich. It's shorthand for the God of empathy, and therefore the God of action. That's who I am. That's what I'm introducing myself to you as in these 10 commandments. And that's why this God should matter to you, because I care deeply enough that I couldn't help but act. That's why I should matter to you. Now let's look at the second exchange between God and Moses at the burning bush. And I think you'll see how it actually animates the second of the 10 commandments.
Along comes Moses to God and says, Mi anochi ki elech el paro. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? V'chi otzi et bnei Yisrael miMitzrayim. How could I possibly take the people of Israel out of Egypt? To which God responds, Moses, it's going to be okay. Ki eheyeh imach. I'm going to be with you. And plus, here's the sign that I've sent you, that you represent me. When you ultimately take the people out of Egypt, you'll be right back here. Ta'avdun et Elokim ala harazeh. You're going to serve God on this very mountain. Now, if you take those words, it's become the crux of the second command of the 10 commandments. Lo yihye lecha Elohim acharim al panai, God says. There shall not be for you other gods. Lo ta'avdein, you shall not serve them.
It's the same words, borrowed from what God said back at the burning bush. The private conversation between God and Moses becomes the template for the national conversation between God and the people of Israel. And In our case, it becomes the rationale for the prohibition against idolatry. Because why is it that idolatry is prohibited? Why is it that God asks this kind of loyalty from us? It's not just a transactional demand of Igor who calls you in to cash in his chips for what he once did for you. No, that's not the tenor of the command here. Listen carefully to what it was that God said to Moses back at the burning bush.
What was Moses' concern? Mi anochi ki elech al paro. There's that word, anochi. It was the first thing God had ever said to Moses. Anochi Elohei avicha, I am the God of your fathers. Along comes Moses and says, yeah, but who am I? If you are Anochi, you're a somebody. I feel like a nobody. Mi anochi ki elech al paro. How am I supposed to go to the king of Egypt?
To which God responded, you know how you're a somebody? Because I'm going to be with you. That idea of being with you, we've heard that idea before too. That's basically what God had said the first time around, in the first exchange with Moses, except he had said it about the people as a whole. I'm with them, I understand their suffering. But now, I'm not just with them, Moses. I'm with you personally, one person. I'm with them in their times of pain, and I'm with you in your time of trouble too. You don't know how you're going to Pharaoh. Don't worry, Moses, I got you covered. I'm with you. That, in a word, becomes the soul of the second command. You know why you should be loyal to me? Because of the deepest kind of loyalty there is. The kind of loyalty that's expressed in empathy, in love. I'm the God who stands with you. Would you really betray a God like that? You wouldn't just exchange him for some other God. Lo yiyeh lecha means, in effect, don't desecrate the ki ehyeh imach quality of God, God's with you-ness. That with you-ness is really the greatest gift he can give to you. Give it back to him as well in some kind of way. Be with him. Don't betray him. So let's move forward into the third exchange between Moses and God at the burning bush. If our theory is right, it should correspond to the third principle of the Ten Commandments. Don't take God's name in vain. And guess what? As if on cue, the third exchange between God and Moses at the burning bush revolves around what main issue? God's name of all things.
Moses says to God, Hine anochi bal b'nei Yisrael. Okay, fine, God. You said I'm a somebody. I'm going to go to Israel. I'm going to tell them that God sent me, and they're going to say, what's your name? What should I tell them? To which God says to Moshe, you know what you should tell them? Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be that which I will be. Fascinating, because the name that God gives to Moses to tell them is that word ehyeh, which showed up in our last exchange of the burning bush. Remember, that was God's answer to Moses before, when Moses says, who am I? I'm a nobody. God says, you're not a nobody, I'm with you. Ki ehyeh imach. Now God says, you know what that idea, ki ehyeh imach, that's actually my name. But God says something interesting here. He doesn't just say ehyeh once, he says it twice. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. What would that even mean? Well, the sages in the Gemara and Brachot, quoted by Rashi here, have an explanation. They said it actually had to do with empathy. They understood that ehyeh is used in the context of empathy before, when God said, I will be with you, Moses. And now God is saying, I'm not just with you, Moses. Tell the people that I'm with them. I'm with them in their times of trouble now, and I'm with them squared in all future times of trouble. I'm with them timelessly in some kind of powerful, concentrated way.
To really be with somebody empathetically, it strikes me that one of the things you sort of need to do is concentrate your sense of being. You can't be distracted, right? And there's different ways of concentrating your sense of being. If you're telling me about something really painful and difficult in your life, and I'm glancing off at my iPad or something and scanning around at the room, looking at other people, if I'm doing that, my attention is fragmented. I'm not really there with you. And even if I turn off my iPad or my iPhone, I put it on silent, but I still have it there buzzing on the table, I'm still kind of thinking about it. It's in the background. It's distracting me. But if I turn my phone off, I leave it in the other room, and I'm really just focused on you, and there's nobody else in the room, and I'm fully concentrated. That's something else. But even then, when I'm as concentrated as that, there's something sort of inherently fragmented about human consciousness. Because still, I'm only here right now, in this little fragment of the present, and the part of me that was in the past, and the part of me that's still in the future, all other future Davids, and all other past Davids, they're not there right now. It's just me and my little present David, that little fragment of me that happens to be here right now in the moment. But God somehow blends past, present, and future existence together into one concentrated sense of being and stays powerfully there with you. As a matter of fact, one could argue that the name Yud He and Vav He, God's special name, is actually really just a contraction of the idea of Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I'm going to be with you throughout time, all of time, collapsed into a single kind of present.
You know, in Hebrew, there's a word for existence in the past. It's Haya. There's a word for existence in the future. It's Yihya. And existence in the present is Hove. And if you take all of those and overlay them, you know what it spells. It spells Yud, He, and Vav, and He, as if God is saying, that's my concentrated existence. I am there with you. That's my name. Lo tisa et Shem Hashem Elokecha lashav. Don't take that name lightly. If my name is, I'm so powerfully there with you, you wouldn't trash that. You wouldn't make light of that. That's principle number 3 in the 10 Commandments.
So I just want to take a quick break here and show you how there's a theme here that's wending its way throughout the discussion between God and Moses at the burning bush. It's that thread I was talking to you about before. In a word, it's empathy, or I'm with you. It was the main idea of the very first thing that God told Moses when he said, I've seen the suffering of my people Israel, and I'm with them in their times of sorrow. And then Moses says, well, what about me? And God says, oh, well, I'll be with you. And then Moses says, okay, but what's your name? And God says, my name is empathy. My name is, I'm the one who's always with my people. This is the theme here.
Now, the way we've been understanding this, God has introduced himself to Moses, has given him his name, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, the empathy name. Yud He and Vav He we've just suggested as a contraction of that. Well, in the fourth exchange, along comes Moses and says they're going to doubt that. They're going to doubt that the God who says, I'm going to redeem you and that which was done to you, this Yud He and Vav He empathy God, ever appeared to you. And God says, you know what? They're not going to doubt it because of these signs. Somehow the signs will show that the empathy God is with you, really is here. Look at the 3 signs. Does any of it look familiar to you? God tells Moses to take some water from the Nile, spill it on the ground, and as if by magic, it will turn to blood. Does that remind you of anything that happens later on in the Exodus saga? Water turning to blood, perchance? It's the first plague, when the entire Nile turns to blood. It's as if this sign foreshadows that plague. I want to argue that this sign and then that plague constitute God's redeeming that which was done to the people in Egypt. What was done to the people? What was the greatest crime that the Egyptians perpetrated upon the Israelite population in all of those hundreds of years of slavery? Wasn't it the throwing of the little infant baby boys into the Nile? And when that happened, let me ask you, did the Nile ever turn red with blood? And you know, the answer would have been no. There's like 9 quadrillion gallons of water in the Nile, too much for it to turn into blood. And so the Nile conspires, as it were, to cover over the crime. It's as if at night there's screams and there's terror and there's stormtroopers taking babies from parents, but in the morning when the parents come before the court and says, where's my child? Here's what happened. The court says, well, we don't know what happened. Can you provide any evidence? And the birds are chirping and it looks like a normal day, and the Egyptians are walking on the sides of the Nile and playing Brahms on stolen pianos and reading Schopenhauer, and the Nile, it looks normal. It looks normal. It covers over the crimes. And you think you're crazy. Well, God validated what was done to the people. The first step in redeeming people isn't just taking them out of Egypt. You have to say, I know what was done to you. So the first plague, foreshadowed here in the sign, becomes the Nile itself turns to blood, because that's the reality. The aggressor forced to confront the crime. The victim validated, yes, this is what happened to you. When people tell lies about what happened to you, God stands up and tells the truth. And therefore, in the Ten Commandments and the fourth principle, we mirror God's actions. We too make a clear declaration. We stand up and tell the truth about God, that He created the world. We testify to that truth by our own actions. When we keep the Sabbath every seventh day, our doing this constitutes a sign, as the Torah later calls the Sabbath. So, God made signs of testimony for us. We make signs of testimony for Him. That's the soul of empathy. It's not just being with someone, it's by your actions, standing by someone and telling the truth about the actions that violated them. And so if God did that for us, the least we could do is reciprocate. The least we could do is tell the truth about Him. Principle number 4.
By the way, there are 2 other signs here, and they have similar implications. For an elaboration of how they fit with the first sign, take a look at our course, The 3 Great Lies of the Exodus, which you can also find on Aleph Beta. It goes through all 3 of the signs at the burning bush and shows this common theme. But meanwhile, let's continue on to the 5th exchange between God and Moses at the burning bush.
Vayomer Moshe el Hashem. So Moses lodges one last complaint towards God. He says, God, I'm not cut out for this. Lo ish devarim anochi. I'm not a man of words. Not yesterday, not the day before. Kvad peh ukvad lashon anochi. I have a kind of heaviness of the mouth, a heaviness of the tongue. I'm just unable to do this. I have a lisp. I can't speak well. You've got the wrong guy. To which God responds, Mi sam pel adam. Who do you think you're talking to? I'm the one who gives people mouths. I'm the one who makes people deaf or dumb or sighted or blind. Halo anochi Hashem. Am I not God? Va'atalech anochi ehyeh impicha. And now go. You have what it takes to do this. I'll be with you. There's that word again. Hariticha asher tedaber. I'll help you understand what it is that you're supposed to say. God says 2 things here. The first thing He says is, I'm the one who makes people with deficits and gifts. And if I say you have the tools that you need to accomplish what you can accomplish in life, then you have those tools. And the next thing God says is, hey, don't worry. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be with your mouth. I'll help you. Moses thought he had a deficit. Kvad peh ukvad lashon. Isn't it fascinating that the Hebrew there is kaf peh daled, and that deficit that Moses was talking about turns into a plus when God says, kabed et avicha v'et imecha. Honor your father and honor your mother.
What's the reason you don't want to honor your parents? You say to yourself, I don't like the life you gave me. I don't like the genes I got from you. I feel it's like somehow all wrong.
And when God comes in the 10 Commandments says, no, kabed et avicha v'et imecha, honor your father and mother, what's the Torah really saying? Your parents gave you undoubtedly gifts and undoubtedly deficits, but you have what you need in this world. Honor your father and mother. They gave you exactly what you need.
And your parents hopefully gave you something else as well. They stand by you. They're with you. They're with you at soccer practice. They're standing in the back of the room at the school play. And that means something to you. It helps you make the most of yourself. That's what God was telling Moses. I'm with you in your mouth. Even as you're worried that your inability to speak is a great deficit for you. I'm with you. So kabed, honor them.
The life they gave you, that mysterious combination of deficits and gifts, it's a reason to honor them. When your parents gave you those gifts and stand by you, you are able to achieve what you need to in this world. So, when we stand back and look at the conversation between God and Moses at the burning bush, we find a common thread animating each of their 5 exchanges. That thread is, Ehyeh, I'm with you. The God of your fathers is the God of being with you, the God of empathy. God acted on our behalf because he cared deeply about us. He was there with us. He allowed himself, as it were, to feel what we felt and to act on that basis. What then are the Ten Commandments? Seemingly they are corollaries of that divine empathy, ways that we, the recipients of God's love and care, are meant to respond to it. When at Sinai we accepted the Ten Commandments, we showed we didn't want to merely be passive recipients of God's empathy, but to reciprocate it. The Ten Commandments all boil down to a single essential truth. If our Creator is there for us, we want to honor that. We want to be there for our Creator too. So, what about our old friend Igor? I would argue that when God, in the beginning of his Ten Commandments, states that he is the God who took us out of Egypt, he's not guilt-tripping us, so much as offering us an opportunity. The Ten Commandments are mitzvos, commands, yes, but even more than that, they express the chance that we as human beings have to be a full partner in a relationship with God, a giver and not just a taker. In accepting the Ten Commandments, we commit to respond to a loving God with love, care, and honor of our own. So this year, as you sit around the Seder table and you ask yourself, what does the Exodus really mean to me? Maybe the Ten Commandments is somehow an important part of the answer. Because on Seder night, what after all are we really celebrating? If we're right in our understanding of God's conversation with Moses at the burning bush, it's not just God's actions in setting us free that we celebrate, but where those actions came from. God was there with us in our sorrow and our pain so powerfully and so deeply that he was, so to speak, impelled to act, and he stopped at nothing to set us free. That gift of empathy impels us to act too. It impels us to respond meaningfully to that being with us. And the Ten Commandments, they teach us exactly how to do that. Have a wonderful Pesach.
Hi, thanks for watching. If you found this video meaningful, pay it forward. Share it with your friends and family so they can enjoy it as much as you did.
I love Beth. She's such a kick. So, offering us an opportunity for empathy, action, to have our own exodus, as it were, us coming out of our mess. And then God, seeing the potential, seeing what could be, remember that God of past, present, future? Seeing that and offering us an opportunity to unite with him, to commit to him, to honor him. And in that, then we live that, we express that the same way that he does. Empathy, service, forgiveness, love. I so enjoy Rabbi Fohrman and the insights that he shares. I just hope it was of value to you as well. So thank you for being with us tonight on another Branches on the Vine with those wonderful folks at Aleph Beta on the Dusty Feet.